welcome to this challenge. I know many of you are very proficient in English and some of you are not. So the idea is that you can get used to English as a tool for business, travel, and be able to little by little get your listening going. Welcome again, and thank you so much for being here. My name is Sheila Harkat. I am director and founder of Mujeres en Carrera. It's an EdTech project that helps women and girls to be included in finance, financial inclusion, together with business knowledge. Oh, people are getting in, so I have to let them in. As part of Mujeres en Carreras project, we decided with the British Argentinian Chamber of Commerce, with Susanna Eccleston, who is around here somewhere, to set up a series of webinars in English so that we can provide content in this language, especially for those who are keen in the language and get their listening going, but also for the ones that are not very familiar with the language, and show you how a second language can broaden your possibilities and business opportunities. Having said that, I'm going to introduce you to Cecilia. Are you there, Cecilia?
Yes, I'm here. Hello, everyone.
Hi, everyone.
Hi, just greetings from London.
So Cecilia is in the UK. We're live from London, and it's 11 p.m. over there. So thank you so much, Cecilia.
It's all right. I'm also Argentinian, so I know what staying up late is like. So it's all right. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for being here. So Cecilia is a diplomatic and conference interpreter of Spanish, English, and Portuguese, trained under AIIC member Diana Merchant, and a translator graduating from the IES en Lenguas Vivas, Juan Ramón Fernández in Buenos Aires. With over 17 years of experience under her belt, she now resides in London when she launched Multicultural, a services company that combines traditional language interpreting and cross-cultural communication with the easiest to use technology to provide real-time, culturally sensitive language support to her clients, so that they can focus on what they want to say while she and her team deal with the how. She was born in Buenos Aires. She has lived and worked in both sides of the ocean, a foot on each side of the language and cultural divide. And over the years, she has worked with heads of state, ministers, secretaries of state, CEOs, change makers, writers, royalty. So we're gonna ask Cecilia some inside information about how it is to like to work with kings and queens, Nobel Prize winners, museum curators, and countless experts. She's professional, she's warm, she's flexible, high-skilled, collaborative, and discreet are some of the words that we use to describe her and her work. So Cecilia, once more, thank you so much for being here. I'm going to head the Zoom to you, and please, should you have any questions, write it on the chat, and at the end of the session, we'll have the opportunity to turn on our mics and ask questions to Cecilia on real time.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm just getting a bit tired just from listening to everything that I've been doing these past few years, but it's an absolute pleasure to join you. One of the very few advantages of what we're going through around the world is that now at least the digital world is getting smaller and we are all connecting a little bit more. So we have opportunities to start exploring and sharing experiences from all over. And that's a little bit of what we are trying to do today, mainly geared towards business and doing business internationally from the point of view of communication. So yes, I'm in London. It's very late, but I'm very thrilled to be with you. I'm actually looking forward to it. So we're going to start delving a little bit into what we have for today. And I try to organize these in categories, let's say, so we can see the differences in communicating across cultures through different variables or aspects of communication. Because I work mainly with Latin America and the UK, my examples are from my line of work. So I'm going to sort of illustrate what the dimensions that I want to share with you with a few anecdotes or examples from my daily activities. So welcome to all of you. This is us today. So it's me, and we have Sheila, and we have Mujeres en Carrera, which is a wonderful initiative. A little bit of a summary of what we're going to do today, which is what I already told you. We're going to tackle communication in international business, some examples of cross-cultural interaction, then monolingual communication in a lingua franca and how to handle it when we are talking to perhaps non-native speakers or people from other countries, and then some tips on how to work in bilingual or multilingual communication when you're using translators and interpreters, mainly because I'm a translator and an interpreter, and I can't help myself. I have to say something about what we do. So one of the main differences when we're working across cultures has to do with time management, but also how we understand time and how we go about it in the daily activities. For example, punctuality, as most of you I'm sure know, is very important, and it's different from it's different in different countries and different cultures. So for the British people and for the English, punctuality is very, very, very important. Mainly because they never want to impose on another person their own time and their own obligations. So it has a lot to do with a trend that is common throughout the English culture of not imposing things on other people, where, for example, Latin Americans tend to be a little bit more relaxed. So if we want to foster good communication across cultures, things that we can do that not even involve any words is take into account how the culture we are interacting with perceives punctuality or lack of punctuality. Because what's going to happen is that if a person in the UK, for example, prepare an entire meeting thinking it's going to last 10-15 minutes, and then they have to sort of summarize everything in 5 minutes because we were 5 minutes late, we are putting pressure on them. And we can't expect them to stay 5 minutes longer, because then they are sort of encroaching or imposing on somebody else's time. So time is a very, very delicate variable in international communication that doesn't even involve words. Another thing that we had to keep into account in terms of time is not only punctuality, but also the order in which things are organized. So for example, I work a lot with visiting delegations from Latin America, and we go to lots of meetings, and I go with my clients to meetings here, and there. So what happens is that when we arrive to a meeting room, there's always, in the UK, there's always, and I love that about the UK, and I say always again, tea and biscuits. I mean, really nice tea, really nice biscuits. So what do you imagine Latin Americans do the minute we stepped into the room and there's tea and biscuit? Phew, to the tea and biscuits. But the English don't, because the English do the work first and then sit down and have a chat. Whereas Latin Americans care to know the people they are going to do business with before doing business. So it's not that Latin Americans are greedy and they just want tea and coffee and biscuits and so on. It's just that it's a different interest, a different priority to each of the cultures. So one needs to sit down, know who they are talking with first, and then get into business. And the other one needs to be proficient and do the things that they have to do first, and then have a chat. So in that clash, we had to find the middle ground. So what happens is that everybody has tea and biscuits during the meeting. It's a way of solving this situation. The same is with networking. So when we talk about networking, it's very common in all Anglo-Saxon cultures, so in the United States or in the United Kingdom to have networking events. And this is because there's usually an assigned time and space where you are focusing on networking. Or even if you are just networking with your colleagues, there is always a time and place to do it, which would be, in the case of England, the pub at the end of the week or the end of the day. You wouldn't be networking or chatting with your colleagues at work or in the office. So this is another way of understanding time and what gets prioritized when and for what reason. And that's our last point. I always say that if, let's say, the Foreign Office wanted to do better business with Latin America, they should schedule one less meeting and give them more time for lunch. Because for Latin Americans, having a long lunch and the chance and the opportunity to sit down and have a conversation with their counterparts is very important. And sometimes it's the part that really makes them to decide whether they're going to go forward with a project or not. So there is all the rational thinking, the logic, and the factual information, but it's the feeling they get from the person that they're looking for. Whereas an English man or an English woman, they had to show they're being productive and they are maximizing their resources. So they'd rather have like a 45-minute lunch, having some sandwiches and some French fries, which they call crisps here, not chips as in the US, and then be more productive. So it's again a difference in understanding time and interaction. Another of the variables that we had to keep in mind, and this is a very, very sensitive one, especially in the times that we are living, is the physical dimension. It is body language, yes. So, well, I'm Argentine, I use my hands a lot, like Italians, for example, but it also has to do with other aspects of it, like, for example, physical distance. When I first arrived in London 5 years ago, I remember I was asked to write an article for the Translators Association in Argentina, and I called it 6 Steps of Separation. Because that's the impression that I had when I first arrived in London. It's like there's this sort of invisible area, which is my personal space, that nobody invades, ever. And it also exists around other people. You don't get into other people's personal space, which means, especially in a business environment, that there is no hugging, no kissing, and that you only shake hands when you have to. So, for example, when you meet somebody new and they are introducing themselves. But what is very common for us in Argentina, arriving in the office and greeting everybody, hey, how are you? Your kiss, or a pat on the back or on the shoulder or a hug, doesn't exist because this personal space is very important. This is also shown, for example, in eye contact. So when you are negotiating, you do make eye contact, usually because you are sitting across a table, and the table is sort of a safety barrier, a buffer between you and the other person. But if you are, let's say, so for example, in the public transport, you wouldn't make eye contact with people. It's very odd. They would be very uncomfortable. And there are a lot of jokes, a lot of, comedy stand shows and sketches and numbers joking about, oh no, I said hello to my neighbor. Now I had to say hello to my neighbor forever, which is like the worst thing that could happen to an English person. Whereas Latin Americans, we get very close. I mean, nothing weird implied here. We are used to being closer physically. We touch one another. If you want to call somebody's attention, you just tap them on the arm, for example. Those kind of things don't happen. We also make lots of eye contact with strangers, and this is very interesting. When we are arguing with somebody, if we are Latin Americans, we step away because distance is perceived as a punishment. Whereas what happens in movies and what happens in Anglo-Saxon cultures, they get very close. that is when, they get very close and they threaten you. So that's what they do, because it's the invasion of the personal space that is a threat. So when you are doing business and you are very tempted, and for example, you are stepping onto a lift, the lift in the UK is the elevator in the US, in case you're wondering what I'm talking about, it's the lift. Respect people's space. Don't sit in the chair next to them. Leave one chair in between, and you will have a more relaxed meeting. All right? Yes, any other questions?
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but here we have Daniela.
Okay.
Cecilia, can you please expand on the idea of networking? For example, in the US, you can call someone you don't know, but that you're interested working with, ask about her position, about the company. Is it the same overseas?
Well, in the UK, you would be better off if you ask somebody you have in common to introduce them. And when you are introducing somebody to somebody, you have to ask the person whether they're okay with being introduced to someone you want to introduce them. As you see, there are lots of emails going on or phone calls. But just approaching somebody you don't know, you would have to be very tactful and very respectful. However, if you are at a networking event and the purpose of the event is to network, then yes, chat away with everybody, approach people. That's one of the very few sort of social/business situations in which you can approach somebody out of the blue and talk. But it's because you are at a networking event and those are the rules that you're playing by. So it's a very typical of English culture that each situation has their own rules, and you play by those rules, and then you move on to another sphere and it's a different rule. So it's not strange at all that maybe you had a wonderful discussion with somebody, let's say at a networking event or at a book club meeting or at a meeting at the office, and then you meet the same person out in the street, and that person would even avoid making eye contact with you. And it doesn't mean that they felt offended or that you did anything wrong. It's just that it's a different situation and the rules of that situation are different as well. Okay, do we have any questions about this? No? Am I speaking too fast? No? Yes? Do I slow down? Just check your heads. No.
Do you need her to speak slower? Or is it okay?
It's okay. If you need me to speak low, I can see you. So just do this and I slow down, okay? All right, so then we have another aspect that's very important that had to do, one thing that I forgot to mention about the physical dimension, and that is compliments. So compliments are a very tricky issue these days, but also they are very much a cultural dimension. So we are very much used to comment on other people's bodies, and we are very much used on commenting on their clothes as a gesture, as a kind gesture. It doesn't mean that you are hitting on people, but it's very, very, very usual in Latin America, especially in countries such as Mexico or Colombia or Venezuela, for men to compliment women on their looks. And it doesn't mean they want to have sex with them. It means that they are being gallant. It's just sort of, old chivalrous kind of thing. So what happens a lot, and it happens a lot to me when I'm with delegations, is that when we go into, let's say, a meeting or an event where there are women, and especially women working in government or sort of in international organizations, Latin American men ask me to translate as their interpreter that she looks very elegant. And that is something that I know is not going to come across well. And it's one of those things, just as physical distance or punctuality, that define a relationship even before you say anything, or even before you exchange information about, let's say, the trade deal or the business deal you are working with. So what I do is I try to explain and say, well, if you please trust me and trust my judgment, that is not going to be understood in the way you intended. I know you don't want to sleep with her. It's not that. You just want to be, gallant and polite. So if the person, sometimes, somebody is very old school and they say, well, but I feel I'm not doing things right if I don't say anything. So sometimes we come to a compromise and I get them to compliment, I don't know, her pen or her business card. I mean, anything that is not on her body. You see what I mean? And the same goes to men. I mean, compliment, you can go to the cufflinks if you want, and that's as far as you can get. Compliment a handbag, compliment something that is around them, but that is not on them. Because that's another dimension of, the physical dimension of the body that is a bit tricky to navigate. So we leave the physical dimension behind, and now we're going into how we approach information. And you say, well, information is information. What could be tricky here? Well, lots of things are different. So, for example, Latin Americans, especially certain countries like Peru or Mexico, sometimes Colombia, and Argentinians as well, quite a lot. Whenever we want to say something, we have an entire introduction where we explain our train of thought and an anecdote and something that happened, and then reminding us of this and that led us to what we want to say. Which means that there are usually a minute and a half introducing like the key message. And that sometimes gets people confused. So what happens is that maybe the English counterpart ends up saying, okay, but then what's the point that you want to get across? Then what is your question? What is it that you're trying to say? Because the English way of approaching information is that they're going to use some pleasantries and they're going to say, excuse me, do you have a moment? Or may I? Like saying, checking that it's okay to invade your time and say something, but then they're going to go straight to the point, very nicely and in English, British accent, but they're going to go straight to the point. Whereas Latin Americans and Spanish speakers in general, we do the whole introduction. I remember back in translation school, I had a teacher who used to say, English is like, in movies where you have a movie reel is like this frame, this frame, this frame, this frame. And when you go in sequence, you get from the beginning to the end. Well, he used to say Spanish is that you begin with the end and then you rebuild the whole thing to get to the same point. And that in conversation could be a little bit tricky. So you have to keep that in mind. English people also use a lot of what is called hedging. So they don't say things as straightforward as they would. So they would say things like, would you mind doing this when you have a moment? Which is the equivalent to our Spanish, I need this for yesterday. Okay? So if you don't quite know how to read that between the line thing, you may believe that it's okay to do it when you have a moment. Whereas the English person that is asking you for this is expecting it for right now because it's quite urgent. They're not going to say quite urgent. Actually, I'm saying quite urgent, so it means that I'm getting used to the way they speak. And the same goes, for example, let's suppose you said you were going to send a report and you haven't yet. They're never going to send an email saying, hey, have you sent the report? When are you sending it? That's what we would do in Argentina. They would say, I'm sorry to bother you, but I seem unable to find the report. So they're not saying you didn't send it. They know you didn't. But what they're saying is, I can't find it. Because again, it's not this imposing on the other person that they believe you didn't send it. You see? So those are things that you have to handle. The same as pleasantries. So when an English person says that they are disappointed, that's big trouble. When an English person says, I have to say I'm a tad disappointed, which is a little disappointed, that means hell. It's serious, serious, serious. So if you're only, following what the bilingual dictionary says, then you say, oh, okay, he's a little disappointed. It's going to be fine. No, it's not going to be fine. It's a major complaint because they always play it down a little bit just for the sake of being pleasant. Okay? So these are the 3 dimensions I wanted to cover before we get into one last item, and then we open the floor to questions, which has to do with languages. So when you're communicating internationally, you can do 2 things. You can choose a lingua franca, which means a common language for all, or you can choose to use, let's say, a translator or an interpreter. So a situation in which you use a lingua franca is like, for example, when you have a meeting where there are Germans, Italians, Spanish people, Portuguese people, French people, and they all speak English. So that English is known as Globish, because what's happening is that there's a sort of an abstract hybrid form of English that is being spoken internationally. This might sound very weird to you now, but if you think about it, the same thing is happening with Spanish. When they say, even when you go to your computer and you select your language, it will say Spanish International, or what they call Español Neutro. What is that? Lots of the time I get hired to, interpret or translate Latin American Spanish, which doesn't exist. So what happens is that because you not try to find a common ground, the language gets simplified a little bit, and we start mixing things. So things from vocabulary. So if you are a native English speaker and nobody else is a native English speaker, what the native English speaker would have to do is try to avoid idioms or slang, because even the same idiom means different things in different parts of the world. So we have an expression, I'm sorry, I'm going to use an expression in Spanish, but I want to be very clear with the example. In Argentina, we say, lo sacó por un tubo, which means that something was done very easily without any problems. If you say, lo sacó por un tubo, or sale por un tubo in Mexico, what you're saying is the same thing that we say in Argentina as cajonear, meaning it was just put to the side and never touched again. So you say it's the same expression. No, it's the same word combination with a different meaning. So when you are choosing to use a lingua franca, you have to be very much aware that idioms and expressions not necessarily translate directly. They translate in meaning, but not the words. So you have to start thinking, what is it that I want to say, and convey that meaning, but not assume that everyone is going to, understand the words that you're saying. The same with regional and local differences. I was just talking about the lift, and I clarified that the lift in the UK is the elevator in the United States. So those differences exist, and that's why, for example, when we speak in international Spanish, we tend to say piscina instead of pileta or alberca. Those are regional varieties. And I always make this joke because I think that it's sometimes easier to sort of translate world peace or nuclear engineering than the lunch menu. Because if you take, let's say, beetroot, which is remolacha in Argentina, there are at least 4 other ways of saying that in Spanish in Latin America. So you have to think of what is this called in the other countries. So try to be as neutral as possible when you're using a lingua franca. The same with accents, regional differences. I mean, we speak the way we speak. When I'm working in Spanish, I keep saying sh. I say macho, lluvia, and pollo. But then, because I want to avoid the vos, I use usted to be clearer. If I'm speaking to an international audience in English, then perhaps I would say the lift or elevator, even if the original doesn't say lift or elevator. because I want it to be clear for everybody else. And the same with simplicity, yes, and with the speed. So you had to be able to modulate, to use, proper presentation skills, and to bring your concepts to a close. So what you are presenting makes sense. That's just also going to help make your case, even if you're just having a conversation over lunch. So these are a few of the things to consider on top of time and the physical dimension and the way you approach information when you're using a lingua franca. If you think this is too much because you want to focus, let's say, on the business that you want to do and not on how you do the business, there are possibilities of working with professionals that will sort of streamline all this. So a translator or an interpreter usually would help you with written text or assist you during meetings or with the cultural dimension as well, or with events, or even with some sort of cultural coaching, which I do a lot, especially when we are in the UK and let's say we go to Parliament and they get to meet a baroness so and so, and people would ask, okay, do I have to curtsy? Curtsy, when you curtsy to the queen, to the baroness, do I call them lady? Do I do what? So that's sort of an ad hoc cultural coaching that you need to be aware of if you are working internationally. You don't have to go to the extent of thinking of, lords and baronesses, but is it more common to call people for the first names, by the first names? Or do I call them by their last name or surname in the UK? And then if they say, oh, please call me Jim, then I call them by the first name. So those are things, again, that contribute to the impression that you make when you are working internationally. And I'm going to just share one more, which we can send if you want to get in touch. Okay?
Perfect.
But I'm guessing you have questions, so I'd rather just discuss anything that you wish.
So, Ceci, here there is a question from Daniela, and she says, how to write a message if you don't know if the person is a man or a woman? I've had the experience of working with people from India, but it's not clear their gender. Like, for example, when their name doesn't really tell us, like if it's a sir or madam. I mean, how should we address?
You had to start playing with the language a little bit. Sometimes names are confusing and it's not very clear whether they are a man or a woman. You can always Google them. Let's see, maybe you find like a Facebook profile and it's obvious that it's a man or it's obvious that it's a woman. Sometimes you find the Facebook profile and still not clear. So what you do is you are very respectful. You can try to phrase what you're saying, so you use their instead of he or she, or to use more you instead of he or she, the way you write it. And if you still need to know, because you came to a point where you said, I have to know whether this is a guy or a woman, ask them what title they prefer. Title means whether you are a Mr., a Miss, or a Mrs., or a doctor, okay? If they happen to be a doctor, you can call them doctor and so on. But if you can just very well say, I'm sorry, I hope you don't mind asking me, I don't wish to be disrespectful. So would you mind telling me what title you prefer? And they would tell you, oh, just call me Mr. Fine. And then you know what you need to do. And that is, you can present that as a way of being sensitive and polite instead of being nosy. So the way you phrase it can just give you, actually you can use a problem as an opportunity to make a good impression.
Actually, that is so funny that Daniela brought it up, and she says, excellent, and thank you so much for your explanation. Because I've had that happen to me once, well, several times I would say, but one of the funniest was, I was in the United States, and I was about to work with an early learning coalition in Broward County, that's where I worked, and the name of the person was Kay Lee, K. Lee. So I thought it was a gentleman. So I treated him as a gentleman, and she happened to be Katie Lee, and I was so embarrassed.
People that have sort of gender neutral names, that could be like Andrea, Andrea, I work a lot with Italian colleagues, and I have lots of Italian colleagues called Andrea who are men because it's a male name in Italy. So, I mean, they're used to having the name confused, just like I'm used to having my surname or last name in the US misspelled. I mean,
Right.
it just happens all the time. So they are, I mean, just brush it off. Like say, oh, sorry, I didn't mean to. I was confused by your name. Hope you didn't take any offense. It wasn't my intention. And they would just say, it's all right, and that's it. If you make a big deal out of it, it's going to be a big deal. So just brush it off, and it's going to be fine. So anybody has any other question? It's very nice in London, I can tell you. We've been having amazing weather. We started with a lockdown and suddenly it's sunny. Before the lockdown, it rained for 5 months. How is that fair?
So unfair.
Yeah, so unfair.
Let's see if anyone has a question. Do you guys...
When you finish a meeting, should we shake your hands? You would shake hands, but I would wait for the host of the meeting to take the first step. So that's the weird moment when everybody's saying, you know, like, oh, hello, okay, bye, and then you're waiting for the other person to sort of, yes, we're shaking hands. But usually what you do is that you wait for the host. I mean, if you are visiting their offices, then it's the person that's hosting you in their offices that should make the first move and shake hands. If they are visiting you in your offices, then be a gracious hostess and offer them your hand. So it's very clear what's going on and what's happening. However, in the UK, it's perfectly normal to end a meeting without shaking hands, because they are just escorting you out or they are accompanying you or whatever. So it's normal. It might happen. It feels very strange at the beginning and you get the impression that something was not, working very well, but it's all right. So people are very respectful of their physical, personal space. So that's okay. It's also in a more social setting or after a meeting, very, very unusual for people to take a taxi together because they're going to the same place, or even walk together, let's say, to the underground, so the subway station or whatever you're going. Just like once you finished with what was going on in this situation, then it's a whole different set of rules. It doesn't mean anything, even after a networking event.
I disagree.
Yeah. You would say if you are here, you would say I wouldn't say I don't agree with you, because again it's like saying you didn't send me the report. I would say I disagree, because I want it to be it's me who is disagreeing. And an English person with this hedging that I was saying, where they sort of tone everything down and they sort of, Mary Poppins. Have you seen the movie Mary Poppins? That she gives you everything with a spoonful of sugar, just to help the medicine down. So that's the same way that you do. So here they would say, I'm afraid I disagree. Okay? So that's a way of saying, or an English person would say, interesting. And that is, they don't agree with what they're saying. I mean, it's the tone in which they say it, or they say, oh, lovely. And that's when there's a lovely that is just like not going anywhere. But they would just, if they had to be very, very straightforward about it, they would say, I'm afraid I disagree. And that's fine.
Here, Adriana says, always put the heavy part on me.
Always. Yes, always. They would always refer it back, especially if what you are doing is sort of complaining about the other person, or sort of, pointing fingers, like saying, you didn't do this, you didn't do that, or I don't agree with you. It's always back to, yes, I'm afraid I disagree. I can't find the report. Oh, I'm so sorry. I'm a bit confused. Would you mind? So there's always that kind of thing. That's why they always come across as so polite. I mean, it doesn't mean that they're just, incredibly nice. Sometimes they're saying very, very harsh things. It's just that they say it in a way where you say, oh, it sounds so nice. Yeah, no. They didn't like what you're giving them.
even in the United States, I got that impression, like even though I studied English here in Icana for many years as a child, in schools, usually here in Argentina, is more British oriented, at least, in bilingual schools, they're not American. But when I brought this with me, this British politeness to United States, you can never go wrong.
No, and Americans tend to be a lot more straightforward. For example, you can see it even if in, let's say, marketing efforts. So Americans would just say, oh, because I did this and I'm the king of that and I'm the master of this. And an English person would never do that. An English person, you would look at somebody and it would just look like, your neighbor from next door. And then it's like Prince Andrew that's standing there and say, oh, did you realize? I was like, oh, yeah, really? And that's it. So they don't boast about this. So, they don't sort of, hang their own horn or blow their own trumpet, or however you want to say it, speaking of idioms. They are a lot more low key. And also they are very self-deprecating. They have a sense of humor that's similar to ours when they sort of make jokes about, oh yeah, but my hair is looking, somebody says your hair is looking very nice, I always ruin it. So they're always criticizing themselves and they laugh at themselves quite a lot, which is like a bit of a dark sense of humor similar to ours. That makes it easier. Do we have any other questions?
Well, I think it's a great opportunity for us to, discuss some things related to living abroad. And when you get to a place, just like you did and I did in the United States, you did in the UK, where you knew the language, but then all of a sudden you find yourself in a different culture with all these new rules. And this awareness building, in your own consciousness that then there are other rules that, apply here, and those are not the rules that I go with in my country. Would you like to tell us your experience?
One of the first things is that you had to sort of take a step back and observe a little bit. So when I got to the UK 5 years ago, almost 5.5 years ago, and before that, I had spent 12 years working as a translator and as an interpreter in Argentina. And I had decades of experience working with American companies. So I thought I was well prepared for lots of things, for which I wasn't. So you had to take your time and watch and observe and listen and keep an open mind, and above all, not take it personally. So I mentioned 2 or 3 times this thing of, this situation, sort of this sphere happening here. And when this situation finishes, the meeting finishes, the event finishes, something else starts and it's a different set of rules. That was very difficult for me because I was so keen on socializing and meeting people that I very quickly, as I suspected, understood I had to join clubs. So that's the way you do things. I always say that English people, when you have this sort of free playing time in kindergarten where you can do whatever you want, well, none of them pass that kindergarten. There's no freestyling anything. Everything they do here has to be an activity with a set of rules. Even if it is Christmas Eve that they spend at home in their pajamas, drinking or chatting, they're not drinking and chatting. They're playing games, they're playing board games, they're playing charades, they're watching TV. There's always an activity in the background. So what happened to me was that, let's say I went to a book club meeting, or we went to, I don't know, a meetup for art appreciation or whatever, or even the gym. But then when the meeting finished, the conversation that I thought was great is gone. And nobody would walk to the bus stop with you, or even to, around the corner. And then I started worrying. I said, did I say anything wrong? Was I, because I talk too much, so there are good chances that I said something wrong. And then I understood that it's just that that's one situation, and this is another situation. So you might have a wonderful business meeting with somebody and then run into them in the cafeteria And that's a completely different situation. And then you go back to the meeting, and it's a wonderful meeting. Are they all bipolar? No, different sets of rules. So that was one of the things. Another thing about living abroad is that you don't find the most unusual, unexpected things. Like, for example, it took me 2 months to find where to. I had my watch it had a battery, and the battery ran out, and it took me 2 months to find where to have the battery in my watch replaced, because in the UK, obviously, you go to the shoe repairing shop to have your watch, the battery in your watch replaced. So it's the guy that repairs your shoes that fixes your watch. So those kind of things are very tricky. I had a very hard time finding shoe polish because I didn't recognize the brand, and so that was a big of a mission that I had going. So team building outside the office, if you are the host. Well, in the UK, or if you're dealing with British people, what you would do to help build your team is go to the pub. But once the lockdown is over, right? Now you had to do a virtual pub. So a bowling game, yes, but a bowling game is more American. So if you are working with American clients, then you would have one of those team building activities like a bowling game, or what's the one with the paint guns? I forgot the name.
Yeah.
Paintballing.
Like
Paintball.
Paintball.
So you will go to paintballing, or you would do bowling games, or you do a tennis tournament. So those kind of activities, that's more American. So English people are not going to do that because, I mean, there's too much physical contact, too much exposure. So team building is done at the pub. I mean, seriously, Thursday, Friday evenings, everybody goes to the pub around the corner from their jobs. They have a favorite one. No need to send email invitation to everybody. People know that's where you go. And that is where you chat about all those things. All the things like, how were your holidays? Maybe you came back from your holidays on Monday and you brought chocolates and they already ate the chocolates, but you only show the photos and you tell the anecdotes on Friday at the pub, right? So that's the place. Over drinks, yes, having beer that is warm, or gin and tonic. And the pub, 11 p.m. If it is a weeknight, Fridays and Saturdays, you can stay until midnight. And then it closes. And seriously, the pub closes at midnight and you're back at home by 1:30 in the morning, and that's it. Improving, yes, they are improving. Well, I don't know. I think that the minute they say lockdown is over, it's going to be like a 72-hour pub drinking.
Probably.
Non-stop. And they drink a lot in the UK, a lot. I don't know how they do it, but they do drink a lot. And that's when they sort of start relaxing and chatting. But again, you have conversations at the pub on a Friday after work that you would never have at the office with the same people, okay? Letters for business gifts. You send business gifts, you would send only, let's say, for Christmas, but not really. What is very, very, very big in the UK is sending cards. You know, there are shops, lots of shops that only sell cards, like birthday cards, anniversary cards, get better cards, Christmas cards, New Year's cards, Easter cards, and you get cards for everything. And you send cards for Christmas. And if you don't send cards for Christmas, physical cards in the post. I do it I'll show you if I can. Well, I had to look for them. But yes, I create cards every year. Last year, I think I sent 350 cards. So, and you buy the stamps and you write the envelopes and you put the stamp and then you go to the mailbox, the big red one. You put them all in and people get them the following day and they are super happy. And that is better than sending gifts. So royalty, well, royalty is lots of rules, You have lots of rules, lots of meetings before working with royalty, because they give you instructions and what to do, what not to do. They are always better dressed than anyone else. They have amazing, I mean, not flashy clothes. It's not like they're wearing Dolce & Gabbana, but you can tell those are good quality clothes. And then you look at yourself and say, I had to invest in a better suit. I thought this one was okay. But I'm always, when I worked with royalty, it was as an interpreter. So interpreters are always sort of blended with the background because we don't stand out. So I'm always wearing sort of black or gray and, you know, not too much makeup, that kind of stuff. But the truth is that they are incredibly polite and sort of very low key in that sense, at least in public, which is what I saw. And the same as politicians, you wouldn't guess that they are, you know, that they come with a motorcade and things like that. So for example, I live in Wimbledon, just down the road from where the tennis championship is. Not this year. This year we're not having Wimbledon, sadly. But when we have Wimbledon every summer, the entire area and the entire neighborhood is chaos. And the royals come to see the matches. And suddenly they show up. There's no motorcade, there's no security convoy, there are bodyguards, you don't see them. It's just like, hello, and they come. They're very nice, very polite, incredibly well dressed, but not flashy. I mean, they don't even wear like colored nail polish. You know, there's very, very low-key, precisely. And that's it. And then you say, I can't take any photos because you can't share them. But anyway, I never share photos of my clients because of confidentiality. But no, it's very nice. And you get to eat. The food is amazing, that's for sure. Best food I ever had was when I was working with royalty. Yeah,
that's wonderful.
Nothing like eating sandwiches.
Are they as polite to each other as they are with other people?
Well, I always saw them in public. So, but when they are in public, they are so focused on working that it's almost like what you would see, you know, looks exchanged between like a boss and an employee, or team members when you're saying, or parents when they have like 4 children running around and these looks are just communicating stuff. So it's very functional. But yeah, they're always very polite. It's very, I mean, the one time that you would see an English person being rude is if they are incredibly drunk. Otherwise, they are always very polite. They are still saying what they want to say, but in a very polite way. So, yeah.
For sure.
Yeah.
Are there any other questions before we close this lovely evening?
Will you send Christmas cards this year? Do send them.
Yes.
I send them. Yeah, I do. I started the Christmas, the birthday card tradition because it's very difficult to send things from abroad to Argentina in the post and actually them arriving unless you send birthday cards. So now my family and my friends and my nephews and my niece, they are all getting cards of all sorts all the time. Poor things. Any book you can recommend? Yes. There are 2 books that you can read. One is more serious, very easy reading, and it's called Watching the English. And it was written by an anthropologist called Kate Fox. And this book is very nice. It's a bit thick, but don't get discouraged by it. She's an anthropologist, and she said that she doesn't want to get, you know, all muddy and dirty going into the Amazon and studying indigenous people because, I mean, she just likes going to the pub. So she decided she was going to study her own people, the English. And she is doing in her writing, and it's very clever, what she is observing in other people. And she gets all these things. Very nice book. Then there's another book, smaller, you know, so less pages, which is called How to Be a Brit. Brit as in British. And this was written, I think it was in the 1950s and then a second one in the 1970s by a Hungarian guy that worked for the BBC World Service. Now this is shorter, but it's more humorous. So it's not giving them, it's just making fun of the Brits. And so I would say read Watching the English first, and then How to Be a Brit. If you read Watching the English, and you have already seen movies like Bridget Jones, read Watching the English and then watch Bridget Jones again. And you will get a lot of things. Like the Christmas jumper, the Christmas sweater, it's for real. I have one and we wear it. And I'm telling you, people wear Santa Claus hats on the underground and on the buses. So you will be able to see the movie from with fresh eyes. Magazines, magazines are not really that big unless you like fashion and you will read like British Vogue. There are magazines. I would say, well, you can read. You don't get the BBC. Do you get? I think that you get the Graham Norton show in Argentina, don't you? I think it was on repeat, one of the channels. So the Graham Norton show, he's a guy that has like the British version of Susana Jimenez or something like that. Susana Jimenez, in her golden years. So he has a talk show with lots of celebrities, and he's very funny. So there's a lot of British cultural references and lots of use of language and so on in his show. I remember last time I was in Argentina, it was available. So it was being played on Argentinian TV, cable TV, I guess. Maybe you still get it, so you can check that. But magazines are not very big here. It's not that there's nothing like Oh La La or any of those magazines in Argentina. So people read the newspaper. So there are lots of tabloids, like The Sun is similar to Crónica, things like that. And then there are newspapers, and they watch the BBC a lot. So if you can catch the BBC or the BBC radio online, do. That's really nice. And I know Netflix, I'm not sure Netflix in Argentina, but there are lots of mini-series. So TV shows here are 6 or 8 episodes long by the BBC that are very good. So you can do that. You lived in the UK, Leonard. Wonderful country. Yeah. Christmas socks. Yeah, I have Christmas socks too. And Christmas PJs, because that's what you wear on New Year's Eve. You wear your Christmas PJs. Yeah. I'm sorry, it's very cold and very dark in December. So Christmas socks and pajamas, they make sense. You don't want to go out for the life of you. Christmas lights are amazing. Like the entire city is lit up with these Christmas lights that are glorious. So there's my Instagram, and I added in my contact details also my personal Instagram, which is about my London walks, because I was very confused about where the river was and where everything was when I first arrived. So I started the habit of doing tourist Sundays and going for walks in London. So now I'm going to start resharing some archive photos, because there's no going out for walks in London. But I have lots and lots and lots of photos of my walks around London. Don't think it's anything artistic or spectacular. It's just London, okay? And that's all. So I don't know. I think that we are running out of time, are we?
We are, and here they're asking us, are you going to have this session recorded? Yes, we're going to upload this session into the mujeresencarrera.com.ar website. So it's going to be available for everyone. Check it out probably by the end of the week.
So my Instagram, you can check Ceci London Walks. I also have my business Instagram, which is Multicultural London. But that's all about, well, you can check it as well, because it's all about communication, because that Instagram is not for interpreters and translators, it's for clients working across borders. So there's a lot of information about communicating. Well, now that, the topic of the day, which is online communication. So from like muting your microphone to how to work. So there are some tips there you might find interesting. And so the London walks as well, you can follow it. And as well, you have my email, Savvy at Savvy, SAVVY, Savvy at multilateral.london. So if you want to send me an email, just remind me that you were at this webinar, so I know what you're writing, and you can practice English and write English. or you can write in Spanish because I speak Spanish too.
That's wonderful, Ceci. Thank you so much for being here.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.
It's been a pleasure. I feel we all learned so much from you today. I think it's a great opportunity to continue doing these meetings and get-togethers online by, like speaking about interesting topics in English. Thank you so much to everyone who joined us today. Thank you, Cecilia. We'll be in touch. Please feel free to write to us to nosotras@mujeresencarrera.com.ar so that we know which are the topics that you would like to see and hear from here in this wonderful space that we have with the British Argentinian Chamber of Commerce. Once more, thank you, Cecilia.
You're welcome. Take care and have a lovely evening.
And thank you all for joining us today.